People don't know how to talk about animation. So this is a video idea I've been kicking around for a while, and it never quite came to fruition. I couldn't just seem to get the right words I wanted to say. I'd lose motivation. But there are two particular incidents that inspired it. The first one was a very, very infamous take on 4chan several years ago. I actually included this one in my Digimon Adventure review, the pilot review, in which the then recent Dragon Ball Super Broly trailer had been out. This person compared the animation to a fan edit, which included a lot more shading and detail. They included such immortal lines as, "Mexicans can animate better than the new animator Toei hired for the movie," which is... And then this infamous line, "The more motion it has, the less animated it is." And that was the initial spur. I wrote up like a lot of what I'm about to say today, but it just never really came out. I don't know, I lost a bit of steam. But then a couple weeks ago, I saw another take of a very, very similar vein as this one. You're telling me that this movie with these animations didn't get nominated for an Oscar, and then has 2 screen caps, and they're showing the detail of the dress and everything like that. So these are obviously 2 egregious examples of trying to critique animation just using a still image, and they're not the worst takes I've ever seen or anything, but they're just indicative of a wider problem within animation communities. Whether it's due to a lack of exposure or education on animation terminology or fundamentals, there seems to be a heavy disconnect between the critique of the visuals and the critique of a story of an animation. Whether it's people overusing or misusing terms like detailed and fluid and motion without actually referring to the nitty-gritty, mislabeling things like graphics, or using animation as a catch-all term to describe everything, or misconstruing the number of strokes in the line art or the amount of shading as a value of the animation's worth. And the constant disregard for anything considered off-model as automatically being bad. And then, of course, the holy grail, chalking everything in an animation up to that all-encompassing word. All of these are problems I see on a regular basis in review and critique, if they're even mentioned at all. More often than not, the story content is what's the focus of review and critique. The characters, the themes, the setting, the plot, and the structure, which are undeniably important. But if the visuals are even mentioned at all, it's like this nebulous secondary category, a facet of story that exists entirely in its own vacuum, that's simply either good or bad. So I want to pose the question, what is good animation? Well, in order to define this, first we have to define what animation is. And it's here where we can start to see the problems in leveling a rigid set of rules for quality, because the parameters of animation are so broad. I'll give you an example to illustrate what I mean. Now, completely separating yourself from aesthetics, is this animated? Well, it's hard to say. It's certainly straddling the line more than you might think. This is my point exactly. This is not the static image posted to A all those years ago. This is technically several hundred repetitions of that same image file, played back at a speed that tricks the human eye into seeing motion. The only thing missing is the motion, so to drive my point home, I'll put a Ken Burns effect, and for good measure whack my moving paper texture background that I put over everything for no reason, and now I can safely say that this image 100% can be considered animation. So if this is the absolute bare minimum we can use to fairly say, yes, this is animated, how do you start to go about defining what quality is? Well, most Western sources tend to point to a list made by 2 very famous animators at Disney called the 12 Principles of Animation. This tends to be one of the first things drilled into young animators' head at university, and most can probably recite it from memory. Okay, let's see how we go. So, squash and stretch, anticipation, overlapping action and follow-through, solid drawing, staging, appeal, I already said solid drawing, of course I'm blanking now, oh my god. I only got friggin' half of them. This is fucking embarrassing. And the rest, yeah. This is a great list and can offer invaluable advice to aspiring young animators. Most can be seen across most fields of animation, and trying to keep even a few of these in your mind when animating can greatly improve the quality of your animations if you are an aspiring animator. But that's just the thing, they're called principles and not rules for a reason. And this list, the 12 Principles of Animation, I should point out that the book that it came through, the Illusion of Life, I believe, by Frank Ollie and... I actually forget their names, but The Illusion of Life came out in the 1980s, so it's only 40 years old. And it's not the Bible, it's not the absolute source of everything, it's a guide, these are principles. Some of the other members of Disney's Nine Old Men list a whopping 28 principles. And if you look through other cultures, other sources, so say for example, if you Google the 12 Principles of Animation in Japanese, they list the guide and there's reverence for them, but they tend to specifically mention that this is the Disney approach to animation. For example, let's compare the required reading for 2 online animation schools. We have the Animation Apprentice, based in the UK, and Anime Shijuku in Japan. I've chosen these 2 because they are of similar small size, they both have very similar methodology in using online lectures, blogs, digital resources to teach the animation, and they both easily had their required reading lists available online, and I didn't want to do that much research, so... The Animation Apprentice has a reading list which is very focused on the actual animation itself. We have things like the aforementioned Illusion of Life, the Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams, cartoon animation by Preston Blair. There are a couple of anomalies, like How to Read a Person Like a Book, a study in facial and nonverbal communication, but for the most part, the reading list is very focused on the actual stretchy animation itself. Whereas if we look at Anime Shijuku's required reading list, it's a little bit smaller and shorter than Animation Apprentice, but we have things like Animation no Hon, or How to Sketch the Human Body by Jack Ham, or Animation Sakuga Ho, books which are very focused on anatomy, detail, and drawing of an individual image, not so much focused on the actual motion itself. Screen died before, so I'm not quite sure. I probably should put something to play over here. I'm gonna pick something at random, okay? So don't just... At the end of the day, character animation is just one of many elements that goes into making up the visual aesthetics or the visual landscape of any given work. And it may not be the biggest metric to judge its visual quality. So, for an example, let's pick a show at random, maybe you wanna, just any, it's not just a random show. The original 2003 version of Kino's Journey. Just a completely random show, and just the first one that came to my head. Now, I adore the visuals of Kino's Journey to the nth degree, but I can be the first one to admit that the character animation isn't all that great. The frame rate is at a steady low, rarely moving above 3s. The show makes frequent use of still shots and animatism, and honestly, often the Genga aren't even that solidly drawn. It's ultimately everything else that's pulling the weight of the show together. The incredibly strong color, lighting, staging, character design, composition, editing, and visual effects meta is what consists of the wonderful makeup of Kino's fantastic landscape. But unfortunately, people don't seem to really care about this, and just equate the number of drawings per second as the number of quality is friggin', I don't know, something like 1 for every frame they get an extra blowjob or some shit. I mean, if that was the case, it would be nice, but even the greats within several industries do this. Like, for example, the amazing Mel Blanc once said this.
Of the films you see today, the cartoons are limited animation. They draw maybe 1 in 10 frames, where Warner's draws every single frame. Mm-hmm. And it's much cheaper drawing just 1 frame and having the mouth move a little bit in the background on a turntable that you see over and over again.
And also for television using cartoons, they need them a lot more quickly than they could be produced in full animation, yes. I'm guessing.
And the full animation actually is what makes every motion believable.
I really don't like this mindset that full animation automatically means realistic or believable, because it's not always the case. Sometimes it can make it look too uncanny. For example, in the Ralph Bakshi animated Lord of the Rings, everything was rotoscoped, so some things look incredibly wonky, such as this scene where Gandalf is supposed to be hurriedly running to consult with Saruman, but it really looks like he just has to drop a massive shit. Animation shouldn't be judged by some John K. Boomerang scale just because that's what the talented racists in the 40s did.
What the guys did in the 40s, nobody alive today can do. In terms of skill, in terms of art, in terms of character, acting.
Don't shove, there's plenty for all. Here you are, Slate Eyes.
Oof, what else do you expect from a rapist? For me, one of the biggest advantages of animation as a medium is that you can be unrealistic and it can turn out amazing. So for example, everyone in the movie Fantastic Planet also looks like they're always constantly turtleheading it, and the characters in Tales of Tales don't even look human, they're that munted, but this is exactly why these movies can be so powerful and evocative with their imagery. They can do things that would be acutely impossible in live action, and if that's not good animation, then I don't know what is. The big defense to all this huffing and puffing and blowing your house down, the big defense would be to simply claim that all of these elements, the staging, the lighting, the color theory, the animatism, the Ken Burns effects, camera effects, all those kinds of things, while important, just simply aren't animation. That they're part of some undefined category and shouldn't be called as such. And my response to that response is, why not? Then what is it? To explain what I mean, let's turn to animation's cousin of... This is a 1962 short film called Legit. Legit? Joe from Pause and Select, please pronounce this French since you are a Frenchman.
Legit.
Which is simply a series of edited stills set to narration and score. No pans, no zooms, no Ken Burns effect. Crossfades are the only changes in frame throughout the whole thing. Zero motion at all. Yet, at the end of the day, would you dare say that this is not a short film? Probably not, because in form, function, and narrative structure, it resembles a short film in every conceivable way. Hell, even though the vast majority of films these days aren't actually shot on celluloid, we still call them films, and we still use film as the verb. Because if you came up to someone and said, hey, we shouldn't call these films because they're not actually shot on film, your response would probably be, shut up, nerd. Language is not a wholly logical system. It's in a constant flux. It changes with the civilization as it changes, and they can lose or gain tertiary meanings, nuances, everything like that, as time progresses. I mean, hell, even the use of animated to mean drawn, moving pictures is itself one of these words. This is ultimately a discussion about formalism and/or prescriptivism, and something common with debates around formalism is this sort of counter-argument, that because I'm saying that it's impossible to make a true criteria or a universal criteria for what's considered good animation, that I believe the alternative, that nothing can be considered bad animation, that there are no rules at all, it's a complete free-for-all, every piece of animation is a snowflake and everything's beautiful, and the teacher all comes from. And nothing could really be further from the truth, you know? Every time I watch a Family Guy character walk across the screen, lifelessly limping as their legs move but their torso remains static, my hope for the future of my favorite medium just dies that little bit more. However, just like with good animation, I believe that something is only bad only when it fails at conveying the message and the story that it's trying to tell. It's all down to what they're wanting to do. If it needs a shot with highly elaborate frame movement through space while characters dance across the screen on ones, then so be it. If it just needs a gradient or a patterned background with a handful of rough keys, just as good. If it needs a rough sketch cut out onto a stick set up against a picture while someone else sets it on fire with a match, even fucking better. This stigma about limited animation somehow being inferior to full animation simply because there are fewer drawings is really, really hard for me to wrap my head around, when it's simply the creator trying to express the story with whatever resources they have. It's like getting mad at a charcoal artist for not painting the roof of the Sistine Chapel. This gets particularly dicey with anime, or any animation industry outside of the American/Canadian one. People tend to look at anime or foreign media in general with this sort of Western lens. I mentioned earlier the 12 principles of animation. And this is a little bit inevitable. I mean, even in my own videos, I'm a Westerner, so I can't escape some of the unconscious biases that I might not even be aware of. But it's really important to understand that Japan, and by extension South Korea and the Philippines, because that's really the whole anime sphere, have their own sets of principles and aesthetics and lineages that go into making what it is. I don't think everyone needs to be like a PhD candidate in East Asian media theory. Like, I certainly have huge gaps in my knowledge and all that kind of thing, but I think it's folly to be prescriptivist towards a country that couldn't even read the instructions on your prescription. I'm pretty proud of that metaphor. I think that's really... Everyone can have their preferences. I'd be a hypocrite to suggest otherwise. For example, I definitely have my own. I mean, nothing too strict or anything, but off the top of my head, I'm particularly fond of rounded geometric designs with little to no shading, muted color palettes, a balance of zany expressionism with still animatism, all while resembling some collective notion of vague superflatness. But that doesn't mean that I can't and don't appreciate animation that falls out of that very broad criteria. And if your preference just happens to be for several tone-shaded, highly kinetic, highly detailed, anatomically correct fight scenes animated on ones, all the power to you. I'm serious, I really hope you can get your fix. But it's not the only thing out there, and it's not the metric in which all animation should be judged on. You don't have to like it all, but it's all animation. I want to close with a quote from Roger Noak, a senior lecturer at the University of Creative Arts in the UK. There is a danger in confusing full animation with good animation. At its best, it can be excellent. But if full animation is used as the norm by which all other animation is judged, this can promote a cruel and narrow attitude. Animation is a wonderful, wonderful medium that's ultimately only restricted by two things: time and your imagination. And trying to limit that vast, unending potential with such regressive chains, I don't know, it's kind of heartbreaking. And for fuck's sake, please stop trying to critique animation using still images. I mean, goddamn, I'm sick to fucking...